The greenhouse had always been a sanctuary for me, a place where I could escape the noise of the world and immerse myself in the quiet company of growing things. It wasn't particularly large or impressive, just a modest structure of glass and metal tucked away at the edge of my property, but it was mine. On that particular afternoon in late autumn, the air had turned crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of the first frost. I remember the way the sunlight filtered through the glass panels, casting dappled shadows across the concrete floor and illuminating the mist that rose from the damp soil of my potted plants. I had spent the morning repotting some orchids, their delicate blooms nodding gently as I worked. My hands were still stained with soil when I heard the familiar sound of gravel crunching under tires. Alex was early. He always did that, showed up before I expected him, as if he couldn't wait to see me. It was one of those small habits that I pretended to find annoying, but secretly cherished. Alex and I had been friends since college, drawn together by a shared love of literature and late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. He was everything I wasn't. Outgoing where I was reserved, spontaneous where I was methodical, confident where I was hesitant. Over the years, our friendship had evolved into something comfortable yet complex, like a favorite book with passages you've read so many times you know them by heart, but still discover new meanings with each reading. I watched through the glass as he emerged from his car, running a hand through his dark hair that always seemed perfectly disheveled. He was wearing that blue jacket I liked, the one that matched his eyes. He spotted me in the greenhouse and waved, his smile visible even from a distance. My heart did that familiar little stutter it always did when I saw him, a reaction I'd become adept at ignoring. "You're early," I called out as he pushed open the greenhouse door, bringing with him a gust of cool air that made the ferns shiver. "And you're predictable," he replied, his voice warm with affection. "I knew I'd find you here, playing in the dirt." He moved through the narrow aisles with practiced ease, careful not to disturb the plants that reached toward him like old friends. Let me explain why this setting matters so much to our story. The greenhouse represented more than just a hobby for me. It was a metaphor for how I lived my life. Controlled, protected, transparent, yet separate from the outside world. I cultivated beautiful things within its walls, but always with a barrier between them and the unpredictability of nature. Much like how I kept my deepest feelings contained, visible perhaps to those who looked closely, but never fully expressed. Alex, on the other hand, was like the weather itself, changing, dynamic, impossible to contain. He brought life and movement wherever he went. When he entered my greenhouse, it was as if the outside world had found its way in, disrupting my careful order in the most welcome way. "I brought lunch," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Thought we could eat here, among your leafy children." His teasing was gentle, familiar. He knew how seriously I took my plants, how I spoke to them when I thought no one was listening. We settled on the small bench I kept near the back wall, surrounded by hanging ferns and the sweet scent of jasmine. The conversation flowed easily between us, as it always did. Alex told me about his latest writing project, a novel he'd been working on for months. I shared stories about my week teaching at the community college, the students who inspired me and the ones who tested my patience. There was a comfort in our routine, in the way we could pick up exactly where we'd left off, no matter how much time had passed. But beneath that comfort, there had always been an undercurrent of something else, something neither of us had ever put into words. The rain started as a gentle patter against the glass, then quickly intensified into a downpour that drummed steadily overhead. The greenhouse filled with the soothing sound, creating a cocoon of noise that seemed to isolate us further from the world outside. "Perfect timing," Alex said, glancing up at the rain-streaked ceiling. "Looks like we're stuck here for a while." There was something in his voice, a note of satisfaction perhaps, that made me look at him more closely. "There are worse places to be stranded," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I was acutely aware of how close we were sitting, of the way his knee occasionally brushed against mine. As the afternoon wore on, the rain showed no signs of letting up. The greenhouse grew humid, the windows fogging with condensation. Our conversation deepened, moving from everyday topics to more personal territory. Alex spoke about his fears of never finishing his novel, of pouring his heart into something that might never see the light of day. I confessed my own insecurities about my teaching, my worry that I wasn't making a difference. There's something about rain that encourages intimacy, that makes people lower their guards and speak truths they might otherwise keep hidden. The steady rhythm on the roof, the enclosed space, the blurred boundary between inside and outside, it all conspired to create a moment outside of ordinary time. Do you remember that night in our senior year? Alex asked suddenly, his voice softer than before. The night we stayed up talking on the roof of my apartment building? I nodded, my throat unexpectedly tight. Of course I remembered. It was the night I'd first realized my feelings for him went beyond friendship, the night I'd almost told him but lost my nerve at the last moment. I've thought about that night a lot, he continued, his eyes on the rain-washed glass rather than on me. About the things we said and the things we didn't say. My heart was beating so loudly I was certain he could hear it. What things didn't we say? I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. Instead of answering, Alex stood and moved to the fogged-up glass wall nearest to us. With his finger, he began to trace letters in the condensation. I watched, transfixed, as my name appeared under his touch, the letters dripping slightly as water collected and ran down the pane. He turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. I've been carrying your name inside me for years, he said quietly, always afraid to write it out where you could see it. The moment hung between us, fragile as a soap bubble. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and crossed the small space to where he stood. Up close, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the fear that mirrored my own. Why now? I asked, needing to understand what had changed, what had given him the courage I had always lacked. Because I'm tired of pretending, he replied simply. Tired of acting like you're just my friend when you've always been so much more than that. And maybe I finally believed you might feel the same way. The confession I had rehearsed countless times in my mind suddenly seemed inadequate. Instead of speaking, I reached out and placed my hand on the glass next to where he had written my name. The coolness of the surface grounded me, gave me the courage to continue. Let me pause here to explain why this moment matters so deeply. For both of us, this wasn't just about romantic feelings. It was about the vulnerability of truly being seen. In friendships that span years, we often create comfortable patterns, roles we play with each other that become difficult to break. We become experts at maintaining the status quo, even when it no longer serves us. This moment in the greenhouse represented the terrifying prospect of disrupting that balance, of risking everything familiar for the possibility of something more authentic. I've felt the same way for years, I finally admitted, the words rushing out after being held back for so long. But I was afraid of losing you, afraid of changing what we had, afraid that I was reading too much into moments like this. Alex's smile was slow and wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mingled with rain. Can I tell you something? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I drove over here today with every intention of finally telling you how I feel. The rain wasn't in my plans, but it gave me the perfect excuse to stay longer, to work up my courage. I laughed softly, shaking my head at the thought of both of us carrying these feelings for so long, circling each other like cautious dancers never quite meeting in the middle. So all this time, he confirmed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering against my cheek. The greenhouse had grown darker as the afternoon waned, the rain clouds blocking much of the remaining daylight. The plants around us seemed to lean in, witnesses to this moment of transformation. In the dim light, with the rain creating a symphony on the glass roof above us, the world had narrowed to just this space, just us two. Alex's hand was still on my cheek, warm against my skin. I leaned into his touch, allowing myself to acknowledge how long I had wanted this. His eyes searched mine, asking a question without words. In answer, I closed the distance between us. The first touch of his lips against mine was gentle, hesitant, a question still being asked. But when I responded, wrapping my arms around his neck and pulling him closer, any hesitation vanished. The kiss deepened, years of unspoken longing pouring into this one moment of connection. His hands moved to my waist, steadying me as I felt myself growing dizzy with the reality of finally having what I had wanted for so long. The crash of thunder overhead startled us apart. both of us laughing breathlessly at the dramatic timing. Lightning illuminated the greenhouse in a brief, electric flash, highlighting the wonder on Alex's face that I knew must be mirrored on my own. That, he said, still holding me close, was worth waiting for. I was about to reply when a sharp knock on the greenhouse door made us both jump. Through the fog glass, I could make out the figure of my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, holding an umbrella and looking concerned. "Are you all right in there?" she called through the door. "The weather report says this storm might get worse before it passes. You should probably come inside the main house." Reality crashed back in, the outside world intruding on our private moment. Alex and I exchanged a look, part amusement, part frustration at the interruption, and part uncertainty about what happened next. "We'll be right there," I called back to Mrs. Chun, reluctantly stepping out of Alex's embrace. "Thank you for checking on us." As Mrs. Chun nodded and hurried back through the rain, Alex caught my hand, his expression suddenly serious. "This doesn't end here," he said firmly. "This conversation isn't over just because we're leaving the greenhouse." The relief that flooded through me was so intense, it was almost painful. "No," I agreed, squeezing his hand. "It's just beginning." We gathered our things quickly, preparing to make a dash through the rain to the main house. Before we left, Alex paused by the glass where he had written my name. The condensation had begun to clear in places, the letters becoming indistinct. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. "Next time," he said with a smile that made my heart flip, "I'll write it somewhere more permanent." The run to the house was a blur of cold rain and breathless laughter, our hands clasped tightly together as we splashed through puddles and ducked under the porch roof. Inside, as we stood dripping on the entryway rug, the reality of what had just happened in the greenhouse began to settle around us like a new atmosphere. Mrs. Chun fussed over us, bringing towels and insisting we change into dry clothes. There was an awkwardness now, a new awareness between us as we navigated this familiar space with unfamiliar emotions. When she finally left us alone in the living room, mugs of hot tea steaming in our hands, the silence stretched between us, full of unasked questions. "So," Alex said finally, setting his mug down on the coffee table, "where do we go from here?" It was the question I had been both anticipating and dreading. The euphoria of our moment in the greenhouse was giving way to practical considerations, to the reality of what changing our relationship would mean. "I don't know," I admitted, curling my fingers around the warm ceramic of my mug. "This is uncharted territory for us." Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm scared," he confessed, surprising me with his candor. "Not of being with you. That's the easiest thing in the world to imagine. I'm scared of messing this up, of losing what we already have if this doesn't work out." His honesty gave me the courage to offer my own. "I'm scared too. You're too important to me to risk losing. But at the same time," I paused, searching for the right words. "At the same time, I think not taking this chance would be an even bigger regret." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, slow and transformative. "That's exactly how I feel," he said, reaching across the space between us to take my hand. "I think we owe it to ourselves to see where this could go." We talked for hours as the storm raged outside, laying out our fears and hopes, discussing how our relationship might change and what we wanted to preserve from our friendship. There were moments of laughter, moments of serious contemplation, and moments when words failed and we simply held each other, marveling at this new permission to touch, to hold, to express physically what we had contained for so long. As night fell and the storm finally began to subside, we found ourselves standing by the living room window, looking out at the rain-washed garden and the greenhouse beyond. It glowed faintly in the darkness, lit by the security light that had automatically switched on at dusk. "Our greenhouse," Alex murmured, his arm around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Our greenhouse," I echoed, liking the sound of it, the way it acknowledged both what had happened there and the promise of what was to come. In the weeks and months that followed, the greenhouse became even more special to us. A symbol of our transition from friends to lovers, a place where we could retreat when we needed to reconnect with the honesty and vulnerability of that first moment. Alex started keeping a notebook there, writing poems and passages of his novel, surrounded by the green life I cultivated. I found myself working there more often too, grading papers at the small table we'd added. looking up occasionally to find him watching me with a smile that still made my heart race. It wasn't always easy. We had disagreements, moments of doubt, times when we had to relearn how to communicate in this new context. But whenever things became difficult, one of us would suggest going to the greenhouse, and somehow, surrounded by growing things and filtered light, we could always find our way back to each other. 6 months after that rainy day, Alex surprised me by adding a small engraved plaque next to the greenhouse door. It read simply, "Where love and courage bloomed." Beneath the words was the date, the day he had fogged the glass with his breath and written my name, the day we had finally found the courage to speak our hearts. "Too cheesy?" he asked, watching my reaction anxiously. I traced the engraved letters with my finger, thinking of all that had happened since that day, all the growth and change and joy. "It's perfect," I told him, and meant it. The greenhouse had always been a place of growth for me, a place where I nurtured life and found peace. Now it had become something even more, a reminder that the most beautiful things often grow from moments of courage, from the willingness to risk what is comfortable for what could be extraordinary. As I stand here now, years later, watching Alex move among the plants with the ease of someone who belongs, I think about how love, like gardening, requires patience and care. It needs the right conditions to flourish, light and warmth, yes, but also the courage to weather storms, to prune what doesn't serve, to constantly tend and nurture what matters most. The glass walls of our greenhouse have witnessed our story unfolding, the tentative beginnings, the passionate middles, the deep-rooted permanence we've grown into. And sometimes, on cool mornings when condensation forms on the panes, I catch Alex tracing my name again, a ritual that never fails to remind me of that first time, when a name written in fog changed everything. They say the best love stories are the ones that take you by surprise, that grow in unexpected places and bloom when you least expect them to. Ours grew in a greenhouse on a rainy afternoon, when two friends finally found the courage to step beyond the comfortable boundaries they had drawn around their hearts. And like the most resilient plants in my collection, it has continued to grow and thrive, reaching always toward the light. Total _char_count, 18,372.